is there enough funds going into that trust to actually pay for that? Because you go, okay, the child, we said it's one of the many big balls in the bucket, but it's not the only ball.
Hello and welcome to Forever Home for our kids with disabilities. I'm Valerie, mom to two with disabilities, one visible, one invisible. I'm a life coach and an author. This space has been created to help you navigate the journey of creating a secure, sustainable forever home for your child. We'll chat with parents on this path, realtors, financial planners, and other experts who can make the process easier. Why am I so passionate about this? Because seeing my eldest thrive living independent of us was a gift I didn't always know I could give. I want you to have the opportunity to explore giving that gift to your child. Hello and welcome to this episode of our podcast. We're so grateful you're here. We are so happy that you take the time to come and listen to us. I am especially grateful that we have Gordon VanderLeek back here again today to help us. Gordon serves as the founder and managing lawyer of VanderLeek Law. Gordon enjoys making the complex area of estate law simple when he presents in webinars and seminars. Gordon is a member of the executive of the Wills and Estates South section of the Canadian Bar Association, as well as a trust and estate practitioner. In 2009, the firm established a division called Disability Advocates, which is led by his wife, Annie. Gordon is a father of 5 adopted children, 3 of whom have long-term disabilities. Gord is a speaker on the topic of estate planning for families that have children with special needs, including topics of trust planning, ACE rules, registered disability savings plans, to name a few. Gord and Annie started the We Advocate podcast this fall, and Gordon is the host of the podcast Estates Made Simple, which was launched in 2023. Gordon is here for part 2 of the conversation. In part 1, we talked about his journey as a special needs dad, how his firm has evolved, and RDSPs, known as ABLE accounts in the US. Welcome, Gordon.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's a delight to be here and continue the conversation. I think it's always a good conversation when we chat. And when I was looking at the calendar at this time together, I was really looking forward to it. So thanks. Always enjoy chatting with you, and hopefully we can have a good conversation that's beneficial for your audience.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sure it will be. I'm always up for learning, and I so want our audience to be informed about making decisions for their child. So, you know that we're all about forever homes here on this podcast. So, Gord, what are the most common mistakes you see families make when buying or transferring a home for their child? And which of these mistakes only show up years later?
Yeah, great question to start. And I think the overarching principle would be the lack of planning.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people come to me and say, well, this is what I've done, what becomes evident is, well, that might be an okay solution or what you might have concluded, but that they haven't done really the integrated planning involved with looking after their loved one, right? So it might be, well, this is just what the real estate lawyer told me to do. So I think really the message when looking at buying real estate, which of course is so fundamental to providing a safe and secure future for our loved ones, that they have a roof over their head. I mean, it's one of the fundamentals. You want food on the table, roof over the head, right? And that their medical needs are taken care of. If we're looking at the big rocks in the bucket, this would be a big rock, right? And doing it properly. So I think it's really just having a tailored solution to the family and what makes sense. And it could change depending on the circumstances. In some cases, if a family's coming to me afterwards, it may be hard to undo it, or there may be more challenges or certain risks they hadn't thought of in terms of setting it up. So again, it's not a one size fits all. All you have to do is this, and I can tell you, just set it up in this way. There's a number of different solutions. And in particular, certainly in the Canadian context, there may be a different tax result. There might be issues with what's available for a particular family member depending on their contractual capacity, right? So we start with, I think, certainly a first assessment of the person with a long-term disability. Is it even an option that they own property on their own? And again, the situation will vary depending on the jurisdiction and what the tax rules are. But in Canada, the rule is that if you own property and it goes up in value, you do not pay tax on the increase in the value of that property if, in fact, it is your principal residence. So that's a term we may otherwise refer to as, well, this is your forever home, right? This is a place where you put your head on the pillow at night, and this is providing that roof over your head, to use a phrase I referenced earlier. So from a tax perspective, we look at it saying, well, ideally, then that sounds good. I don't have to pay tax. The alternative would be if somebody else is holding it, like a parent, or ultimately this might go to a trustee as part of a trust for this person on the death of the parents. In that case, then there would be capital gains, right? Because it's not their home that is in there. Now, again, I'll talk a little bit about some of the unique considerations for trust planning in this scenario. But for example, in some cases, somebody comes and says, oh yeah, my kid owns the property. But then the conversation with the parents is they are concerned about vulnerability. They are concerned about, well, what can they do? Or they say, yeah, well, we paid for it because our child has no money, but they didn't put a mortgage on, right? They didn't protect their investment into the property, or they're not on title together with the child, which has its own unique set of considerations. So I think usually the choice is you put it in the name of the child, preferential treatment under Canadian tax rules, because the increase in the value of that property is not subject to tax. So assuming it's a property that would go up in value over time, it's a significant consideration. Right. Certainly in Calgary, southern Alberta, or even in Western Canada, you could say we've had economic success, but it's up and down. It's a cyclical market. But on a long-term basis, the idea would be, well, real estate's a good investment and goes up in value. So what's the tax consequence of that? Right. So choice number one would be the child owns it, assuming they have contractual capacity and they're able to do it. Okay. Option number two is the parents would own it. Or then you might have a hybrid option number three, where we establish a trust. And that could be while the person is alive or on death. What happens to that property on death? Is it part of a testamentary trust, or can we put it into a residence trust now? And that might be another option that's available as well. Less often known or used, but certainly an option where it could be in a trust, but still to preserve the principal residence exemption, so the preferred tax treatment. Right. But really saying, what is a good long-term plan with regard to that? So I think planning on this, number one, given the dollars involved, usually it's a bigger investment, it's a chunk of money. Yeah. And how is the parents' investment into that going to be managed and reflected? And how does this interact with other children in the family? What happens as part of the estate plan? So ideally, we're doing the planning in conjunction with an estate plan to say, here's how we're looking after the child, balancing the interests of the other children as we go through and sort of working through some of those. So the answer to the question would be, it's easy to sort of get through the conveyancing of buying a property or putting it in title. Putting title in a particular way, I mean, that's kind of a real estate transaction. It's relatively straightforward. It happens all the time. You can go through and do it. It's really the planning and behind is what makes sense for this family in this circumstance. Mm-hmm. And you look at all the different factors. Certainly my perspective would be we start first and foremost, not with the tax, but with the vulnerability and putting a plan in place to protect that. And because we don't want to risk that somehow this investment in this property doesn't turn into a forever home. We have problems down the road. There's other people that are making claims against it, or there's uncertainty or disputes with regard to the management of that property. So coming up with an integrated plan, I think would be, sort of the first recommendation. And then what makes sense for every family, that does vary, right? But it's making sure we look at all the considerations and weighing those, the pros and the cons, and then making an informed decision and making sure there's other people who know about that plan and are integrated, are in agreement with carrying on with the plan to provide that protection.
Right. So it's not just as simple as going out and buying a home that's going to fit the needs of the child. And, if you're really on the ball, sort of looking at the future needs of your child and will this home be able to accommodate that? It's all the background stuff that probably most of us don't really think about. I know for us, we have looked at the trust piece. So on the passing of myself and my husband Scott, the house that Melody Ann is in will go into a trust for her,
Right.
the Henson Trust that we are fortunate to have here in Alberta, and so grateful for that. That's the path that we've taken, but that's something that we didn't know anything about. This is only just a recent thing.
Right.
This is why we're doing what we're doing, because we want you all to be educated.
Right. So, but looking at that, but it's okay to say if I have one in place, now the conversation goes into, well, how is that part of the allocation of the distribution within the estate, right? What does that look like? Does the house become part of that child's inheritance, or are they going to need more? And doing some math as to saying, well, let's project how much financial assets will be part of that trust. Is there enough money to provide for the care and the upkeep of that home, plus other needs as well? So it's part of that holistic analysis of looking after your child and making sure that they're going to be okay. And certainly it's for many a significant blessing, a luxury, a great opportunity to say, well, you can afford to acquire a home for your child. Not every family can do that. So I think given the nature of the investments and looking at all the different facets of it, there's a number of different planning opportunities to provide protection for that. Really, the vulnerability comes is significant value in the name of the child that others can take advantage of, right? Saying, well, if it's in their name, they could say, well, suddenly there's another person in their life going, well, I could use some money to invest in this new business startup. Why don't you help me with that? And I'll have you involved in the business and give you a title. And here's a business card. Why don't we go to the bank and do a line of credit secured against the home? Well, what if the person carries on their disability is such that they don't appear to be disabled and they could walk through with a mortgage broker and actually make that happen unbeknownst to the parents? Who
Right,
maybe bought, wait a minute, that was supposed to be your forever home and now somebody else has a mortgage on it? What are you talking about? Or
right.
suddenly the person's in a relationship and the person says, well, I think you should put me on title in joint names. But that's maybe not the intent of it. And what happens if they separate and there's a divorce? And now there's a claim going, I'm entitled to half of it
Yes,
during the course of this relationship. Well, okay, that wasn't planned when you
right,
dealt with the simple task of, well, in whose name should you put it?
right.
Right. So I don't think it's driven so much by tax, although it's a factor to look at what are sort of going in with your eyes open, but what's really going to provide that protection
Yes,
for the child on a long-term basis. And really, as you describe it, right, what's that forever home? We want it to be forever. And making sure there's a solid plan for that. And we're considering all the various risks. And the assessment of those risks is different for each family,
yes.
right? That's why it's not a one size fits all. It's really
Mhm.
about tailoring something. And I guess at the end of the day, making an informed decisions of the options that are available to you
Yes.
on that becomes important.
Yes, and I don't think Chat GPT is going to cut it. So I really would advise the audience that you go and speak with an estate lawyer.
If you're looking at AI to help with some of this stuff, I think that's well said as a teaching point is this isn't going to solve that problem, which I think is a good assessment of AI. It's a tool, but it's
Mhm.
not always giving you the right answer, or it doesn't take into account the advice of others who have a lived experience and have understood all the various risks and can
Mhm.
make an assessment based on your family's situation. A good question for AI would be, I have a meeting with an advisor to talk about it. What are some good questions to ask?
Yeah,
Don't look for the answers, but you could use it to help you ask the right questions so you
yeah,
come in as an informed consumer, right? That you go, well, you have a little bit of knowledge, but then rely on those with the expertise, or get the knowledge of other parents who've been in a similar situation. Well, what did you do? I think that's very helpful. What did you consider? What was important to your family situation, and glean where there may be similarities or differences in that other family situation? What conclusion do they come to?
Mhm.
And is that helpful, right? I
Yeah,
mean, much like you wouldn't buy a car just based on what AI told you your needs are. What do you drive? Is it helpful? Is this suitable for your family? You talk to a dealership, you look at different options, you check out financing. Like you look at things from a holistic perspective to make a
Mhm.
decision about what's the next vehicle. You don't rely on what AI tells you you should have. You look at all different facets and say, let's try to make an informed and reasonable decision that is going to be helpful. So I think AI is good for making sure you're asking the right questions, and then
Yes,
trust the professionals to help you guide to get the right answer.
absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. Thank you so much, Gordon. How do you legally structure living arrangements involving roommates or live-in support workers to manage liability, tenancy risk, and continuity of care?
I'd love that you have this question on our outline because I think that's often one that doesn't get enough attention.
Mm.
Certainly, you could have arrangements where somebody maybe mistakenly thinks, well, they're part of a property and they are acquiring ownership rights. So it starts with saying, let's make sure we're dealing just with occupancy rights, not with ownership rights, and let's preserve and protect that ownership structure. But assuming that's locked down and we have a good plan in place for that, I think it is important to, in fact, have clear arrangements. No surprise coming from a lawyer saying good to have some documentation because people forget verbal conversations or their recollection of it 7 years later. If that's when the dispute arose, going, well, this is what was said in the very beginning 7 years ago, their recollection is going to be different, or they have some selective memory going, what are the arrangements, right? No, I thought about this, right? Or you owe me this, or you can't kick me out, those kind of arrangements if it's not working out. So I think if somebody's coming in, you want to have that documented. Certainly in the Alberta context, the provincial government, if it's providing supports, is going to want to know, well, who is this person and what is their relationship? If it looks like somebody who it's more than just delivery of services, but there's a potential relationship here that could impact and be part of the scrutiny of saying, well, that person's your partner. And now we're going to need their information because it could result in the clawback of government support. So we want to be clear to say, if you're a tenant, you're a tenant. You're somebody who just has a right to occupy. And then, of course, we always want to know what are the terms and conditions. How often are they evaluated or adjusted? And also, how do we end the relationship? Do we have a right to terminate? And what does that look like? What's fair and reasonable? And just kind of negotiating those terms up front. So really a contract is about documenting things that should be discussed. I often say to people that it's like a checklist of things that should be part of the conversation. So it kind of forces conversations on important things that you might not think about. Because if you get somebody, you have a parent who's just delighted that there's somebody who's prepared to provide support to their child,
Yeah.
right? And because it's a hard thing to find good people. And it's like, they're not even thinking about what are some of the bad things because it feels like, oh, that's going to scare the person off. I just want him in there to start working, right? But I think it's fair to say, there should be a conversation about these things and have that candid conversation. If they're providing care, what are the standards? What happens if, they say they're going to do it and just consistently not showing up? They're just randomly failing to provide services. Can you just stop? What is your recourse? And those that are actually in there, it's helpful to ensure that their roommates, they understand their role and how that can end and what are the terms and conditions. So if they fail in that, they're supposed to provide services in lieu of maybe a reduced rent or no rent, right? Because they are providing services. Those services should be delineated. Because what if they're not doing that? I got to stay here rent free and maybe not do as much as what the expectation was. Well, that's a source of some conflict. And assuming we want to stay away from conflict in relationships, a contract, well, it sounds like, well, that's a bit heavy. I think really aids good communication and talking about things you should talk about, right?
Yeah. Well, it lays out the expectations, right? And
Yeah.
I've always said, if it's written, I'm coming from a healthcare background, if it's written, then it's going to happen or it has happened when we do our charting and stuff. So if it's written, then I've got recourse to say, well, this is what we agreed to. And I'm observing that you're not meeting the standards or you're not meeting the
Right. So
expectations.
in a positive way, it holds people accountable. It also reminds them of, okay, I better, maybe I haven't done as well. And the relationship can improve if there's some description. So you might say, here's an agreement, and this is clearly what they're going to provide so that they can also be supported. And we're avoiding getting into a conflict situation, which is not comfortable for anybody. So an agreement is good for documenting what the agreement is. And also, if you start with, well, this is the kind of stuff that should be in the agreement, it's going to remind you to talk about things you might forget to talk about, right? So it's good as a checklist to kind of go through that to make sure you have a fulsome conversation, and that just preserves the relationship. And at the end of the day, no one goes into, if there's somebody who's providing really good supports to your loved one, we don't want that to end, right? So if we can avoid misunderstandings,
Right.
that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I was just thinking of what's just recently happened to us. So we have Eden House where my oldest daughter stays, and she has two roommates. And one of them is actually moving. The parents are setting up their own home for this child. And it was interesting. The mom asked, "Oh, was there a damage deposit? Did we pay a damage deposit?" So just to your point of 7 years ago, which it was, it's almost 8 years ago now, forgot what was the arrangement and didn't really remember what all went on at that point in time. So it really is good to document every single thing. It might seem like overkill, but I think it's still very necessary.
Yeah, it's about making sure you're maintaining that cordiality in relationships and you're not getting into, well, that's not true. And, that feels accusatory. So sometimes if you're looking at the conflict, while it seems a little bit more at the front end of, well, why do we have to talk about these things? You'll be grateful if there's ever further concerns because
Yeah.
we just forget. You might have had to say on that situation, well, I don't know, let me go back and look at the agreement. And if it's in there going, I acknowledge receipt of a damage deposit of X number, well, there's the answer. Everybody knew it at the time, but if you don't write it down, memories can fade. And it's helpful then if it's right there in the agreement and what happens to that damage deposit and when does it have to be returned or how much notice this person now has to give in fairness for you finding somebody else.
Right.
Can they just say, oh, by the way, I'm showing up tomorrow with the U-Haul and we're moving out. Thank you very much. Versus, do I at least get 30 days notice? Like what's fair, right?
Yeah.
And just having an agreement of that up front just means you're going to maintain a good relationship with that family, which is what we want. It's at the end of the day, it's about the relationships and making sure the frameworks are in place to avoid conflict.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And interesting because we didn't actually talk about giving notice. We were blessed they gave us 3 months notice, but we never had that in the agreement because it honestly never occurred to me
There you go.
that
That's a
they
good
would move
example,
out.
right? And again, a lot of times, the things that come across a lawyer's desk is usually when there is conflict that can't be resolved. If everybody's getting along and being reasonable, and of course we would give you 3 months notice. Like they wouldn't think about doing the midnight move, as you will, right? But you're going
Yeah.
to go, well, where do we stand now? Because you're kind of budgeting based on a
Yeah.
certain cash flow coming in, and suddenly that's upended. That's not comfortable. I mean, you'll deal with it, but it'd be better to have adequate notice. And it sounds like they're honorable people and they're doing
Mhm.
the right thing by
Yeah.
giving tons of notice. And that could even be they're going to give notice beyond the minimum. But
Yeah.
it's helpful to have those expectations of saying, just consider various scenarios. That's
Yeah.
interesting. You have that experience and it sounds like it's going okay. But,
Yes.
a good lesson for our listeners to say it's not inappropriate to document those important relationships, what
Mhm.
is expected.
So, Gord, tell us when parents are no longer able, capable, or they're no longer alive, what mechanisms ensure that the decisions about the home reflects the child's preferences and quality of life, not just asset preservation?
Yeah. I think fundamentally this comes down to having a plan for who's going to surround that
Mm,
child and assist that child. And I think what can be very important in one's lifetime is to have almost like a letter of wishes, which can obviously
mm,
evolve over time, but to say, well, this is what works and this is what doesn't work for the child. If you're looking at it from an estate planning perspective, there may be aspects of that conversation that ends up being part of the legal terms and conditions of the trust.
mm,
It could, but there's a lot on the periphery. I think what this question highlights is that there's a lot on the periphery of the legal structure, both during your lifetime and when you pass away, that really is kind of putting the muscle on the skeleton, if you
mhm.
will. And so just being able to document what works, right? I'm sure with your daughter, as I asked the question, well, what works for her? And your brain is going just a mental checklist of, well, this and this and this and this,
Yeah.
right? So really what's important is to say, would other people have that knowledge? How do they deal with that? And
Mhm.
sometimes the legal structure isn't appropriate because that's intended to be a long-term plan and sort of that's the skeleton, if you will. But just documenting, here's the plan. Like, this is what's going to work. We need this level of accessibility in the home. Or if there's a change of homes, these are the things that are important, or this
Yeah.
is what works. There's a lot that can go into coming up with a plan, and that can change more rapidly than the legal structure,
Right.
right? What you're thinking is 15 months from now, the legal structure is pretty much the same. I have this trust structure in place. I don't need to change my will. but what's right for your daughter will evolve based on her needs, which can evolve, right? We know what it is today, but it might be different 15 months from now. So just having that in place and having it documented. So if something untimely happened to you and you suddenly were not able to communicate that, let's just use the example of you're in a car accident, you end up in a coma in the hospital. Is everybody going to know what's best for your daughter? But if you have a letter going, this is what works, right? Beyond the housing and other care, I find it's sort of part of that overall passing the knowledge along. I think a lot of that can happen verbally between parents or to other children or other future caregivers, people who are going to step in. So having those provisions and having a plan in place and then having some of those details, get it out of your head and into a document, almost like a roadmap document, one that says, here's what will work. And then you've got the right people in place who can carry on with that roadmap. So just getting the knowledge from between your ears and into a written format, I think really helps. I mean, the verbal communication of that knowledge is certainly a good starting point. But I think when you put fingers to keyboard and you start typing it out, you start thinking about other things. So I think it's a useful way. I mean, definitely have the conversations, but the problem is, well, what if it's not that person, it's a different person?
Right.
All that wonderful communication is now, we don't have the benefit of that transferring to other people and going, here's the plan. Here's why we're going to have that house in place for a long time, because it is configured here, and here's what works and what doesn't work. Here's the need for caregivers. Here's the need for a supported roommate, and just coming up with a bit of a plan and then sort of thinking through what is the financial implications to make that happen, right? Because it's happening now, typically because a parent is volunteering their time. They're probably not charging for it, right? I don't think you're sending a bill to your daughter for all the things you do. Your facial expression, for those watching on YouTube, will give you the answer to the question I just posed. But it's, of course not, right? In this context, I think all of this to say is this all takes time. It takes a lot of time to put this together. My experience is that if you are in an estate situation, that is because somebody died, sometimes unexpectedly, or the person acquired a disability, the primary caregiver, and their knowledge has gone with them. If they have a stroke and now you can't talk, and people are left to try to figure it out. So what I see certainly in an estate situation, if there's been an untimely death, now other loved ones are scrambling around like, where do we even start to try to figure out the care for this person with probably complex needs and not always self-evident needs, right? Especially if there's other factors going in, mental illness, other factors beyond the physical considerations of providing good care. So the point being is leaving it to just after the funeral is generally not a good thing. There's always exceptions to the rule, but what I see is people are under huge stress. They're scrambling. They're trying to figure things out, and it's not a pleasant experience. It's highly stressful. So having a plan in place saying, okay, if it ever happened, this is a good plan. Right? I think becomes really important. So think about how to make the job easier for those who are going to step in. We got to consider the legal structures, and that's unique for each family, but also what would they need to know? And then what's the best way of passing that on? I think almost having this roadmap document or kind of a letter of wishes. Here's what we think. Here are the key people. Here's a person who can come in who's a handyman who's going to fix it. Well, they could find a handyman, but if you can tell them, well, I've got one already, right? Who knows the house and knows how to fix everything, and they know the person. Here's the caregivers. Here's where the agreements are. How do they know all that stuff if it's just between your ears? So think about what you would need to know if you were the one doing it for a friend or a relative, right? Think about if this is your sibling and they have a child, you have a niece or nephew that's like your kid, and you were named as the person who was going to come in and look after things. What would you expect to be in the filing cabinet when you're driving to the house after the funeral to try to figure things out? Right? So if you think of, if it was me in this role, I would hope my sibling would have this, 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 and this. Yes, a properly thought out legal plan, a good will. Where's the will? Okay, I need to know that, but I need to know, well, what are my next steps? Who do I call? Who are the advisors? Where are the supports? What's the finances look like? If you could detail all that, I think you would breathe a little bit more easily after that visit to be able to say, okay, this is going to be a lot of work, but I got a great place to start. I've got this 6-page roadmap that has everything recorded, right?
Yeah.
So one final thought on that. When you listen to that, as our audience listens to that, it's, I think, a fair conclusion to say, holy smokes, that's a big job. So let's just acknowledge that could be a lot of work. Depends on each family's different. But let's just acknowledge it's a lot of work. So here's my advice. Start with one thing, all right? Get the fingers to keyboard, write one paragraph, and then say, and then I'm going to look at it in 3 months, and then write another paragraph, and then maybe another page. And if every 6 months, every year, you pulled up this document and you added to it a little bit, on the assumption is you're going to be around for a while, it's not something you have to do immediately. You're not on death's doorstep, and you're going to go, this would be really helpful, which quite frankly, if we're looking at it from a couple situation, assuming there's a husband and wife scenario, and maybe stereotypically, if the wife is involved in some of the primary care and the arrangements, is the husband going to know all this stuff? Sometimes that's not always shared. Or it could be vice versa. I don't mean to stereotype. It could be the husband's on the front line and the wife is less involved. But whatever that is, certainly our experience, and with you nodding your head, I can think your experience would be, yeah, there is an element of kind of sphere sovereignty, right? That you each have your areas of expertise and support. And that's not uncommon. You know, maybe it's one person in the couple does the finances. If we're taking it apart from the kid, it's just really good to have a plan to say, well, if something happens, here's what you need to know. If you do that, that's a real blessing and a gift to your spouse or partner. And it's going to be even magnified if you're talking about, this is where my other kid, my able-bodied kid's going to need to know, or my sibling, or I've got a niece or nephew, or somebody else is going to come in. And just having that roadmap document, you know, you're giving them a map into the future. If you think of when you go on a trip, you have a bit of an idea of where you're going to be heading. That's helpful, right?
Yeah.
When we go get these travel books. Well, you could go here and you can go there. Well, it doesn't tell you exactly your itinerary, but it's helpful to have some idea of where you're going and what you could expect on your trip. And we do that planning, I think a similar type of planning for our loved ones in the context of their physical plant, their home, plus how their care is going to be managed.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Gordon, because for us with setting Melody Ann up at Eden House, that was the big push, was to get the house set up with the agency providing the care and all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of stopped there. I wasn't thinking about all the little details for when something happened to Scott and I. So a huge weight was lifted when we got Eden House set up, because, you know, when something does happen to Scott and I, Melody Ann's life will continue. Her programs will continue. The staff who are working with her, some of them have been there long term. So there'll be some that know her well, but all those little things. So since we got the Henson Trust piece set up and we've decided that Melody Ann's home will go into the trust, we're blessed to have 2 homes. So our younger child will get this home that we're living in. But the thing was, oh, okay, so what about all the little things? So my thing now is the banking. I do all the banking for Melody Ann. So how am I going to transfer that knowledge to someone else? And so I'm thinking of actually creating a video. This is what I do each month with Melody Ann's finances. I do this, I do this, I do this. I cross-check here and I print this and I put it in this file. So that's kind of my next thing that I'm thinking of. But I also know that there are other things that I need to do for this letter of intent so that somebody would have, as you say, that roadmap to be able to just jump in. Because my biggest fear now is if financially, okay, bills need to be paid. Melody Ann has bills that are paid every month. I don't want that to fall by the wayside. I want to make sure that that continues.
But just even the knowledge of that, like what are the bills and when are they regularly due? Like they can figure it out by watching the mail that comes in with the invoices, or check, are they going to see your inbox? If that's where you're getting electronic invoices, do they know how to access that? You know, here's the people you call when you have to change the address for who's getting it. And again, all the right legal structures in place on that. Certainly in that context, one thing that might be easier, I had somebody, you talked about doing a video, and I think you're very comfortable with that, knowing you do the video. You could turn on a Zoom call and hit the record button and just talk. Right now we can get a transcript and then you can stick that in AI and say, hey, clean this up and fix it up. And now you can start editing and fine tuning it, or, you know, get on your phones. We all have voice memos. There's lots more voice dictation. You could just say, I'm just going to walk around the house and talk. Right. And then I'll go back and clean it up with the details, but just do that brain dump. And you can use some of the technology to maybe avoid having the writer's block that you sit there with fingers and keyboard on a blank page and go, I don't even know where to start, right? But just dictate something and have it transcribed. There's more and more, and this is again, AI can help with some of that stuff. It's whatever you do, even if you just start and do a little bit, it's going to be a great gift for those who are going to surround your loved one when you're not around. There's already going to be disruption. We know that. But if we can soften the disruption a little bit, that's a good gift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Gordon, can a Henson Trust, which is what we have for Melody Ann, directly own real property in Alberta? And what drafting considerations are essential if it does?
Yeah, so the answer is a trust is not a legal entity, but it's a relationship. It's a relationship between somebody who owns the property, that's the trustee, for the benefit of another person. In this case, we're talking about a person with a long-term disability. That would be the beneficiary of the trust. So the trust is that relationship. So, and the rules can vary even in Canada between provinces and territories, and would vary on different jurisdictions. So you got to check locally with an expert in that area to make sure what works. But in Alberta, you can't actually register the trust at land titles, but the property would go in the name of the trustee of the trust, right? So whoever you've named in your will for what we refer to as a Henson Trust would be the ones that would go and put the property in their name and properly document to say, well, that's not our property. We're holding it for Melanie Ann, right? And we're doing it pursuant to these terms and conditions. So we know the accountability is there and the legal structure is there. That's detailed in your will. But yes, the trustees can hold property that is part of the trust. There's not a limit on that. They can control a bank account, which is typically what we think of when you're giving an inheritance. But if part of the inheritance is real estate, they can own that as well. And we want to be careful. Is that in a separate trust from the Henson Trust? Does that make sense? And there's a number of considerations in there in terms of, well, what's ultimately going to happen to the property? And does it have to be separately funded? Does that come from her trust? Is there a different source of money to provide for the home? That's where customizing that is an individual exercise. There's not a one size fits all, because it's about providing adequate support for that child. Right. And that's obviously then once you get a plan in place, you have to maintain it, because that analysis can change over time. But the answer is yes, the trust can own the property, but it also could be a separate trust. And that's something that, is part of the planning process. Oftentimes we'll say, hey, this property is directed to go into the trust. So the same people are controlling it, and the financial assets within the trust are helping to fund the upkeep to the home. And ultimately, when it's sold, the proceeds would go back into the trust and controlled in the same trust structure as opposed to a separate one. But again, I've certainly in the past drafted a separate residence trust. It's separate and apart from sort of the financial assets, because that makes sense for that family situation. So because the needs are different and finances are different between the families, and the projection of the amount, what is adequate support into the future is a personalized analysis. Much like you can't say, well, there's a standard retirement plan for everybody. Well, no, everybody's different, because what you plan to do in retirement is different. Your life expectancy, how much you want to spend per month. That's why you hire a financial planner to come up with a retirement plan. It's a similar exercise on the estate planning side. Is we got to customize something that fits that family in that circumstance. But you can put the real estate as part of the trust. Yes.
Well, thanks so much, Gordon, for that. How should trustees be empowered to handle repairs, renovations, modifications, or eventual sale of the property?
Yeah, so this becomes really important, and the analysis is different depending on who owns it, right, with regard to that. So if the parents own the property, and the idea that it would be going into a particular trust to support that child on their demise, we're in a situation, obviously, that they'll control these things in their lifetime. But having a property drafted trust to say, there's going to be these expenses, are they properly funded? So if it's in a separate trust, that trust may need a pool of money to be able to fund those amounts. If it's part of the overall trust, well, then that would presumably be a legitimate expense, because it's all part of the same trust structure and the property is part of that trust. But it is a slightly different analysis if we're talking about, what if the child owns the property? One of the things that you could consider, if the child lacks contractual capacity, then you could have a trusteeship order. Now, that's not always in play, but it's usually either a trusteeship order or alternatively, a power of attorney can be put in place, where the person, the child themselves, assuming they have the legal capacity to sign that legal document, could provide the authority by way of a power of attorney that could then be registered on title. The problem with the power of attorney, it can be easily changed. They could just be revoked, right? So the trusteeship order provides a little more protection because there's a court process involved to make changes. Now, with that being said, it's not available for everyone because you have to prove incapability of making financial decisions in order to get the trusteeship order, and that may not be applicable, particularly for those where it's a physical disability, not a mental disability that's in place. Sometimes there's both, but sometimes it's clear that, well, the person can make their own decisions, and that's what the parents want. Well, then having appropriate protection. So number one, we would look, if there is a trusteeship order, we want the proper provision and authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, lease, deal with all the real estate. Yeah, beyond it properly being funded in the court order, you definitely want to have those provisions, or it could be detailed in the power of attorney to say these are the expenses that are there, or certainly then within the trust structure that's part of the estate plan, there can be more details with regard to authorization of expenses. And then part of the analysis is there enough funds going into that trust to actually pay for that? Because you go, okay, the child, we said it's one of the many big balls in the bucket, but it's not the only ball, right? So now how are the other balls, if they have a financial implication, going to get paid? Like food, social activities, vacations, recreation, education, those all need to be funded, right? And we need funding for the support workers that are in, people are coming in for respite, or people are coming in, what about the supported roommate? What does the contract look like that? And in the Alberta context, that is, you layer on top any government supports that provide some funding for all that. Also building in the contingency of, well, what if those government supports dry up? Like, that gets part of that analysis of how much is enough to provide for that safe and secure future for that child. So it could be making sure the will has sufficient flexibility in the terms and conditions of the trust that these expenses can be funded, and the legal document supports it. If it's owned by the parents, if the child owns the property, are we into a trusteeship order or a power of attorney, and making sure the necessary authorities are in there. And then we get back to the roadmap document or the letter of wishes to say, well, what is involved in managing this property? There's probably more than the average person might think about what you have to do. Oh yeah, this is, just the overall maintenance, and then dealing with all the relationships of the people that are around and who's assisting with that. That would be the way they empower. The other thing to consider as part of that is the support structures in place. It may be one person who's empowered and has the authority, but where are they going to get the resources? So I think what we see is a bit of a trend where you could also say, well, there's a group of people that might be almost like in an advisory capacity. There are some in different provinces, where they talk about microboards, more popular in Ontario and British Columbia, where they're almost taking this corporate governance structure to say, we need like a board of directors to guide what happens to this home and the care of the child, right? And they have monthly meetings and minutes, and just like you would on a business venture, right? That you would have a board of directors that manages a business enterprise. If this is a enterprise, could there be a group of people who are advisory that just to help, and maybe the burden seems less weighty? And if we know there's people that could be turned, I think that happens a lot informally. I'm not suggesting that's a sort of formal legal structure that doesn't exist in Alberta, but it doesn't mean you can't think about how do you circle the wagons around your child, right? What does that look like? Who are in those wagons, right? And it could be one person who's kind of the lead, but there are other people who are providing great support, and having that documented. Or if you go through that plan and realize, well, those people don't exist, well, now we can start working on, well, let's build those relationships to try to make that happen. Or who do we turn to? Who could help in there? Are there organizations in town that provide those kind of levels of support, or other family support groups? Talk to other families who've gone through a similar situation. What's worked, what's not worked? If you start by documenting, what's going to become evident is maybe if there's some deficiencies or some things that could be better. Now you can build a plan on how to work on those things to improve them over time. Again, the point being is that doesn't happen quickly right after the funeral, right? Advanced planning on this is essential, I think, and takes the stress out of what is already a stressful situation, takes some of it away, knowing that there's a well thought out plan. And I think gives the peace of mind. I guess we can end on all of this really means if we have an integrated plan, we're thinking through the details, that's really going to lend to that peace of mind for the parent to go, I plan on being around for a while, and it's kind of scary to think about what if I'm not here. Let's just say that's what keeps you up at night,
Yeah.
right? For all of us who have a loved one in this situation because of the vulnerability. But if you start in the process, maybe it feels like you can peg away at this a little bit at a time. It's a long-term process. The
Hmm.
sooner you start, the sooner you'll feel like, I hate to even think about it, but I know there's a plan.
Yes.
And that's going to be comforting for those that come in behind you to do this work, to know that there is a plan. And I think it's a great gift that you can leave them and hopefully help in this process of not only coming up with a plan, but doing the documentation of the knowledge required to carry out the plan. I think once you do that, you begin to realize where you might need more things. Let's just do the best we can. And I think that's all you can do. It may not be perfect, but if you're doing the best you can, that there's some comfort in that, right? But just continual improvement, just work on it a little bit at a time and try to break it down into component parts may make it seem a little less daunting.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. Gord, where can our audience go to find more about you? Just remind us.
Yeah, so email's gordon@vanderleeklaw.ca, and our website is vanderleeklaw.ca. We're under that name in most social media, so if you can find us there. We do have a division of the firm called Disability Advocate, so we have a separate website there that lists the podcast you mentioned, so that might be of particular interest, and that's disabilityadvocates.ca. And if you have any questions on that, it could be myself or a member of our team might be help to guide you through this process and get you steered in the right direction.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. So we will end with a quick word of advice or inspiration or encouragement, your choice.
Yeah, I would say you don't have to do this alone,
Yeah.
right? I think particularly on this topic, it really lends itself to getting support from professionals, right? You may need to bring in your accountant or financial planner to look at the financial side of it.
Mhm.
If you're looking for a home, okay, you go out and hire a realtor to say, well, tell us what kind of homes in what sort of neighborhoods should we be thinking about? So certainly from a legal perspective, having that in place, I think working with a professional in your local jurisdiction who understands that, is sensitive and, to disability concerns would be there because it is multifaceted. So do not feel like you have to figure this all out on your own. You need to go out and get the expertise to help with coming up with the right legal structure and assimilating everybody's information and coming up with a plan, and then continue to refine that plan over time and evaluate it for its appropriateness. I guess the advice would be you don't have to do it alone. There's a benefit here of many voices, and looking at it from different perspectives will be important. So seek those people out and recognize that you can get help along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gordon, for being here. We so appreciate all that you shared with us today. We have lots to process.
There is lots there, but thank you for your efforts to highlight this topic. I think it's an important one because it's about the fundamentals, right? It's about housing. It's about that safety that is a big part of that component of creating a safe and secure future for our loved ones. So thank you for your podcast and the work you do and the insights to say we need more conversation about this particular topic. And I'm honored that, this conversation hopefully will be seen as helpful or a useful starting point in that process.
Yes, thank you. All right, audience, don't forget, live with intention, embrace the journey. Thanks for joining me today on Forever Home for our kids with disabilities. I hope today's episode gave you something new to think about and it increased your confidence on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, do tell others about it. Use the text feature to let me know your questions. Tell me what you want to know. Until next time, take care and keep building your child's future.